where we said like, hey, we will just take a probabilistic, we'll just take a probability function and we'll just say, hey, if it's like epsilon, if it's like on the epsilon side, then you just explore randomly, or you just choose like the most greedy action that you can. Actually in this lecture, David Silver was able to only go through multi-armed bandits. Pretty much most of the focus is on multi-armed bandits, and then he introduces the contextual bandits problem. He does not go into any of the slides related to the contextual bandits, and then he quickly talks about how some of the solutions that we talk about for multi-armed bandits can be extended to MDPs. So I'll probably do the same thing. I can try to maybe, I've looked at a couple of other resources. I can try to share a couple of other resources related to, say, contextual bandit, but I've not really even looked at MDPs. So I think this is going back to that part where any online decision making you're going through, you're going to have some information at this point of time, and you can either decide to, based on the information that you have, make a greedy choice to exploit the information that you already have, or the exploration part of it is you can go and gather more information so that in the future you have more information to, so that your greedy choices in the future are better than your greedy choice in this particular time step. The idea is to make sure that you're able to gather enough information over the long run to make better overall decisions. Now, so there's an interesting nuance here. Someone asked the question in the lecture. When we get to the slide, I can talk about it. So a lot of the algorithms that and the solutions that David Silver talks about here are assuming it's like a infinite long run rather than a capped long run. And then he talks about some of the contextual bandit way of thinking about a problem has better approaches for like if you have only like 100 time steps or 1,000 time steps. If you know there is a budget in terms of time steps, then the contextual bandit approaches might work better than what we are going through in the multi-armed bandits. So make sure that I think we should all make sure that we understand that everything that we're going through for most of this lecture assumes infinite time steps. I think that a lot of the approaches actually are derived from that. In fact, in the Sutton and Bartow book, if I remember right, they just say that this is there is a chapter on multi-armed bandits, but in general, with respect to exploration, they just say, hey, there are approaches for exploration, but we're not going to go into it. It's like totally out of the scope of the book. So literally, for us to understand sophisticated ways of doing exploration requires us to go and read papers and read like other tutorials that people have applied in the industry to even understand how to do exploration in a sophisticated manner. Saying that, some examples of exploitation so that we are all able to relate to it in a real life manner. So one is like restaurant selection, right? If you're staying in your locality, you can just say, hey, I'm just going to go to my favorite restaurant. I know what they give me. There is no surprises there. I know what I'm going to pay. I know that it's kid friendly or whatever makes most sense to me. So I just go to that favorite restaurant, and then just like that's exploitation. Exploration is like, hey, there is a new restaurant which just came up. A couple of friends have maybe told you that like, hey, that's a new restaurant. You should try it out. And then trying it out is essentially exploration. And by exploring, you're collecting information. Maybe that new restaurant would end up being much better than your current favorite restaurant. And you end up going there at all points in time. So, and again, one other nature of the problem that comes up is like a lot of new restaurants, when they start out, they're great, the chef is great, and then after a couple of years, they start going down. Some of us might have seen it also. So that's the stationarity, non-stationary part of the problem coming in as well. So which is why you always have to keep exploring. I'm not going to go into the other examples here. So if someone wants to talk about an example from their own domain that they've seen, I think it would be interesting. That way we can all just like stay connected to the discussion here.
From my limited experience, like we were trying to use RL algorithms in a wind turbine, so that like you maximize, so the idea is to maximize the output from a wind turbine. So but there were like lots of like framing the RL problem itself was very difficult, because like we were worried about like how like continuously operating the system would affect the lifetime of the components, because like you can't risk running for a long time and then like uh, allow the components to fail quickly. So like putting some pieces of the components were very interesting. And yeah, so that was the problem that we were trying to like figure like whether we could even try solving that.
Great. So that's an example of how can we do exploration in a safe way. Anyone else have anything in their own? I mean, it does not have to be from an industry perspective, right? Even something that you faced in your personal life.
Yeah, I have just a very simple example. The restaurant selection example is choosing between restaurants, but maybe you like one particular meal at a restaurant. So you can do your own, you can say half the time I go to that restaurant, I'll order this one dish because I know I like it very much. But the other half the time I might, order something different because maybe in fact there is something else I like better. So that's kind of not just the across restaurants, but even within the same restaurant, you could kind of apply that same exploitation algorithm.
Nice. So that's like dish selection and dish
Yeah.
exploration in favorite restaurant.
Right.
Great. So I'll just keep moving. If anyone else has any examples that come to your mind while we go through the rest of the slides, it'll be good to talk about it, because I think this is like very, very real life, right? I think some of these solutions you can potentially apply in your real life. Again, like we heard earlier, like how can we do it safely is an important part of it. Cool. So so one caveat is if you had watched the lecture, but if you did not see the slides are different from what you see in the lecture. So I had to try to balance that in some way later on in the lecture. I even took like a couple of screenshots of the video to see maybe if I can present it. But maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we'll do it. But just a caveat that like the slides here and that is available online is different from what David Silver uses in his lecture. So there are different ways of doing exploration. So these are like various different approaches. So the naive exploration is what we've already seen in the past in this lecture series, where you just add noise to greedy policy, and you just say do like epsilon greedy, and then like especially when we were doing control, we were doing epsilon greedy throughout. So I know that we're not going to spend a lot of time on MDPs, but take a look at this. All of this is applicable to RL. So if you take all of the previous lecture slides that lectures that we went through, you remove epsilon greedy and you put in, like you can put in optimistic initialization, or you put optimism in face of uncertainty, or you put probability matching, it will work. And some of these are also like work together. You can do epsilon greedy as well as optimistic initialization. So some of these can also work together in some way. You can combine and mix and match and all of that. So some of those approaches are possible. Saying that, optimistic initialization is essentially where you're saying that if I take any action, then the reward that I'm going to get, I'm not going to initialize it as 0, but I'm going to initialize it as a very high number, or even the max that you're aware of. That forces the system to make sure that it is checking all different types of values, different types of actions that you can take. I think we go into like a little bit more detail later. It just forces the system to go and learn as much as it can. It's essentially the equivalent of new restaurant is better than old. So every new restaurant that comes up in your locality, you just go there. You just assume that that's the best restaurant, and then you just go there, and then you drop down your expectation of what you're going to get there after your first visit there, or after like 3 visits there. Then you just say, hey, you know what, service is really horrible, I'm going to go back to my favorite restaurant. Optimism in the face of uncertainty is you go to your new restaurant and you just try out one dish, and you've not tried, but you had like a few other dishes that you want to try out in the future. You assume that those other dishes are really the best, and you chose the most crappiest dish when you went there the first time around. So you want to go back again to try those few other dishes and check whether this restaurant becomes your favorite because of those few other dishes that you did not try in the first time around. So that's basically, you have uncertainty about the quality of some of the other dishes there. So you still keep visiting the new restaurant to collect more information. Does that make sense?
But I guess like optimism in the face of uncertainty assumes a prior distribution. That's the difference between the optimistic initialization and the optimism in the face of uncertainty, right?
So
from a technical standpoint, because like we always like say, like if we have 3 actions, we always pick an action that has the most uncertainty, in the sense like because it could lead to potential more rewards.
Yeah, I think the potential part is the right thing there, where you have some sense of what is the potential there. You are assuming a distribution in some sense.
Yeah.
So you don't need to assume a distribution. You just have to assume some high potential. As long as you are able to assume a high potential, then you're trying to get enough information to prove that potential is not there.
Yeah, but we have a say like we know the bounds, right? We know like how good it could be, how bad it could be.
Agreed. So yeah, if you know some bounds, this works really well in your favor. You're able to bring your bounds in, and you're able to use that well.
Yeah, but like because like optimistic initialization and optimism in the face of uncertainty as a concept is much more similar. But I guess the second part, the later part, like we assume a distribution, whereas like in the first one, we just assume we give a maximum reward, but there is no bounds as such to play with.
Yep. Any other comments here? Okay. So, and then I think probability matching and information state search, I think it's much better going down to the detailed slides to talk about it. Okay, so what's the problem here? The problem is the Multi-Armed Bandit. I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time on it because the setting, people would have seen it a lot of times in the past as well. So essentially you have multiple arms. The main difference between this and MDPs that we saw in the past is you have multiple arms. The action that you take is you're picking an arm, and once you pick an arm, you're going to get a reward. You don't know anything else. The only thing that you know is I picked this arm, I got this reward. I picked this arm, I got this reward. I picked this arm, I got this reward. That's it. Whether by picking an arm, you are modifying the world state, what is that world state that you've modified? You don't know any of that. So essentially what the Multi-Armed Bandit does is just like simplifies the more complex reinforcement learning problem into a problem which is much easier to reason with, which is also from a computational perspective, something that you can put out there. So there are a lot of applications of Multi-Armed Bandits which actually do well and which deliver a lot of value. In fact, one of the slides later on, David Silver talks about a Yahoo application of Multi-Armed Bandit for showing display ads, and which did well for Yahoo at that point of time. I don't know whether they still use it or whether they moved on to something else. So in fact, Multi-Armed Bandits is something not too proprietary, but I can share that Multi-Armed Bandits is something that we also use within my company for our experimentation system. So I know that this is actually used in industry a lot more than the other reinforcement learning approaches that we've been covering. Any questions or any doubts about the framing of the Multi-Armed Bandit problem at all? Because we're just going to move on and we'll not come back very deeply to this. Okay. And again, the overall goal is over your infinite run, you want to maximize cumulative reward. So that's the goal that we are operating for. Cool. So I think this, so we talked about, like, let's actually start from the last line on the slide. So you can maximize total reward, or the other way to think about it is you can minimize total regret. And what is regret? And regret is essentially for every step, if you did not take the most optimal arm, you did not pull the most optimal arm, you are losing some reward. So look at, I think the idea here is that V star, think of V star, you don't know, and you're trying to learn what is V star and which arm gives you V star. But let's just say before you learn, you are told what is V star. So if you know what is V star, if V star somebody tells you is 10, that's your maximum reward as soon as you get in. For example, I think we just heard about the windmill, framing the windmill problem. I think framing the windmill problem, one way of framing it is like you can assume that the best performing windmill ever in the world, you can take that as V star. Now, once you take that as V star, then the regret is at every step when you're trying to gather more information in the name of by doing exploration, you are taking a suboptimal step, and then when you take that suboptimal step, you get some reward back, and then the gap between the best reward possible and this reward is regret. And what you are trying to do is over the entire when you're summing over all of these regrets, you want to minimize total regret. So that is really what we are trying to go for here. The going back to the first line here, the formulation of the problem is you take an action, you get a reward. There is no state involved here. I think we should all be clear here, because later on we will bring in state for looking at contextual bandits. So this is still multi-arm bandits, not contextual bandits. Here, there is no state involved. You just pull an arm, you get a reward, and that's it. Any questions here?
Yeah, I was just thinking about why it seems to me there are problems where I don't care about the total regrets to solve the problem. Like, why should we maximize the cumulative reward? I don't understand necessarily always the cumulative part. I mean, really, when I have the bandit, the way I think of the problems that I'm interested in, maybe it would be, I want to find out which arm is the best arm to pull. And so really, I want to bring to zero the regret for a step. For each step, I want that step to go down to zero on a per step basis. And I don't necessarily care about cumulatively how I got there. If I'm training a robot and I wanted to learn what's the best action to take, I mean, I care to some extent maybe how long it takes to train, but ultimately I care about having it perform the right action in the end and knowing what's the right action, you know what I mean? Not the cumulative history of how much regret I had in all the steps during that practice time. I really want to just make sure that in the end, I find the action that will give me the smallest regret.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the best possible arm right now is not the best possible arm throughout the entire entirety.
I think we're assuming a stationary, aren't we now? Stationary problem?
This is, so as of now, I think of it as a stationary problem.
But still, like in the sense, like each of it has like a certain payout, right? Like we don't know what's the payout gonna be. So like one system is gonna be like, say, it gives a payout every 0.3, or it has low probability of payout, or it has high probability of payout. So we still have to figure that one out. So just collecting the first two samples and then figuring, okay, like this one give me 2 rewards, but if I use a greedy, if I don't explore, I might miss on potential better rewards by.
Yeah, I guess I understand that part of it. I guess it's just the way what your objective is, I suppose. You can decide that the objective is to maximize the cumulative reward, but I can imagine another way of looking at it is I want to actually find out which arm is the best. And that's not the same thing as maximizing the total. It's an extra constraint to say, as I find the best arm, and then in the end, at infinity steps, I will just keep pulling the best arm, right, all the time, no matter.
Not necessarily, right? So say that you have 2 arms. So technically, say one arm pays out 0.6% of the time, and the other arm pays out, say, 0.5% of the time. So technically 0.6 is better than 0.5. So if you just stick on, say, like pressing the 0.6 arm, like it's still not going to give you a payout 0.4 of the time. Instead of that, if you choose an arm that gives you a payout at that time, you can cumulatively increase your reward than just sticking to the 0.6 arm. So that's why we are maximizing the cumulative reward or minimizing the regret.
Oh, well, I'm not sure. I don't quite think I follow that. I mean, if I know ahead of time that 0.6% for one arm and 0.5% for the other arm, and I want to maximize cumulative reward, I think you would always choose the 0.6% arm every single time. There'd never be a reason to choose the 0.4, 0.5%, right? If you knew ahead of time.
I think, Anthony, what you're going for is like a modification of the traditional multi-armed bandit problem formulation. It's interesting to get into that. And maybe some of the approaches that we would talk about here can be extended to talk about what you're bringing up here. Maybe it's like, maybe it's different, maybe it's the same. But yeah. I think it's a discussion on its own in my mind.
I mean, I guess you can decide to think that the cumulative reward is important to you, and if that's how you define the problem, then well, that's your definition of the problem, and then that's how we approach it. But I guess I can see other ways of looking at it.
But I guess like in RL, at least from the course point of view, we have always defined RL as a problem which maximizes cumulative rewards.
Yeah, I think maybe there are some problems where what Anthony is talking about matters most, where it's about just like searching for the best arm. And when you find the best arm, you just like give it like infinity reward at that point of time. And maybe the formulation just changes in a different way.
Well, I mean, it's like the game of chess or something. I just want to find I want to find the algorithm. I want to find, in the end, at the end of my training, the computer will know how to play the game of Go the best possible way, like finding the best arm. I don't really care if how many mistakes it made along the way to find the best algorithm. I just care that in the end, I found the best algorithm. So I guess I don't really care in the weeks of training, the cumulative number of errors or reward. I don't know. I think that's a different perspective.
Yep. Yeah, I think when you take that perspective, probably some of the approaches that we talk about might not work or might have to be modified. So the approaches that we talk about are going to be like focused on this particular goal.
Mhm.
Okay, so continuing on regret. So this is just an extension of the previous slide, where we're just saying every step you're taking an action A, some action A, and the number of times you take action A is this term, which is NTA, N sub TA, and what you really want to look at is regret, which is a summation of at time T you have taken a set of different actions, and each of those actions you have taken N sub TA times, and you know V star, and you just take a difference of V star, you just take the count and then you sum it all up. And what David Silver talks about here is that like any good algorithm is going to ensure that wherever you have large gaps, you're not trying that out way too many times. If you're trying it way too many times, guess what? Your regret is going to go for a toss. But then that's not good exploration exploitation balance. You don't have a good balance of exploration exploitation at that point of time. The problem is you do not know V star. You just know what you get. So you do not have this gap. So this kind of gives you like a theoretical way of looking at regret, but you do not have V star, so you do not know, and you do not know the shape of QA, so which means that you do not know gaps. So given that, what kind of approaches can we come to? Now, if we look at summation of regrets. So I hope everyone was able to get this graph. It's the x-axis is just like time step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to infinity. And like if you take like epsilon greedy, or if you take greedy, it's unbounded. The total regret will just keep like, if you go to infinity, that's going to go to infinity as well. So it's just like linear, it just keeps growing. And it grows linearly along the way. So why is that? It's why does greedy have this like total regret, which just scales like linearly? It's because when you're doing greedy, at some point of time, I mean, like you have, why would you do greedy? You do greedy because you have collected some amount of information, and then you just say, that's it. I'm not going to go collect any more information. I'm just going to exploit it nonstop till the cows come home. So what happens is that there is possibly an optimal path that you did not collect information on, which means that gap between that optimal action and your greedy action, that gap, every time step you're incurring it. So that's why greedy just keeps going. The total regret just keeps going. Now that makes sense. Why is the same thing for epsilon greedy? It's the same thing for epsilon greedy because for probability epsilon, you are not taking that optimal action. Because for the probability epsilon, you're not taking that greedy, you're not taking the optimal action. While during epsilon greedy, you found the optimal action. You keep collecting information, you found the optimal action, assuming everything tends to infinity. But in spite of finding the optimal action, for that epsilon probability, you're taking a non-optimal action forever. So because you're doing that forever, you are going to get regret, incur some regret for every time step when you take a exploration action. So that is why epsilon greedy is also linear here. Now, there is another line here, which is decaying epsilon greedy. This is where over a period of time, you just say, hey, you know what? I've found my optimal action. I've done that for like 1,000,000 steps, and I know this is optimal. I know that the problem I have is I've conquered this problem. I'm not going to take any more exploration. I don't need to collect any more information. I'm just going to keep taking it all the time. And that's why decaying epsilon greedy kind of has a sublinear regret here. So this is this is a setup here. Any questions or comments here? Okay, I'm going to move on.
Does David Silver cover how decay plays along with number of time steps, or is there some like rule of thumb on how we go about the decay? If that's coming out, then we can just defer to it at that point of time.
Yeah, I think there's some coverage on that, so we can defer to that. Okay, so just quickly, I don't want to spend too much time on the next couple of slides here. So this is just like greedy algorithm selects action with highest value. Greedy can lock on to a suboptimal action forever. So that's what we just covered in the graph. You could, if you could just do like estimate the value of each action by Monte Carlo evaluation, and then you're going to get that greedy action. And then once you get that greedy action, you just, if it's suboptimal, you're just going to lock on forever. And epsilon.
I have a question on that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it seems to me like there's some like startup details about the greedy algorithm which are not described. I mean, so what do you mean? Like, imagine we have a bandit, a 10-armed bandit, and of course we don't know in the beginning the mean value, you know, for each of the 10 arms. So how would the greedy algorithm make its first action selection when it doesn't yet have information about any of the 10 arms?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is either one of two things happening, right? One is either you're given some initial values and then you just use those initial values forever, which is quite possible. Your friend tells you that restaurant 1 is better than restaurant 2 is better than restaurant 3. You just take that initial value and then you just stick to it. You don't ever go to restaurant 3 and then you're done. So that's one way. The other way is like where you take an epsilon greedy algorithm approach, and then you get to a certain state where you just say, hey, epsilon is now 0. So then for going forward, you're always greedy.
Yeah, I mean, even in epsilon greedy, I mean, most of the time, if epsilon is a small probability, most of the time you act greedily and you kind of still have it seems to me, the problem of how you select the action. I mean, I implemented this algorithm just to reproduce the plots in Sutton and Bartow, and I realized that that book does not give you enough information of how to implement the greedy algorithm. And
you could start randomly, right, Anthony?
Yeah, well, for example, you have 10 bandit arms. At one point, Sutton and Bartow says break ties randomly. But that doesn't help you, because then you choose arm number 7 randomly and you get 0.1, you know, like your reward. Well, now if the initial value was 0, let's say for all of them, then well, then you always pick arm 7 from then on. And you get
in epsilon greedy, you won't always choose 7 though, right?
If it's epsilon, yeah, if it's greedy.
If it's greedy,
I think what I ended up deciding is you have to at least try each arm once. In the lecture, David said you might try one arm a couple of times, and then another arm you try it and it has a higher value, so you stay with that arm all the time. So I mean, that doesn't sound like a very principled algorithm to me. I don't understand what kind of algorithm he was talking about there. That makes no sense to me. Yeah, I think there are a lot of choices on how you implement the greedy algorithm. And from my code tests, it makes a huge difference in the output that you get and how you implement it. Just a note.
Yeah, for me, the intuition is greedy algorithm is you're just not collecting any more new information. You're just taken all the information that you collected in the past, you made a certain decision, like more of a lookup table, and then you just keep following that lookup table.
Well, I mean, according to that, then you have to decide, what do you mean information in the past? When you're starting the problem, you have no information. So you could decide in some way to gather information, like try each arm at least once, maybe, or something like that. And then you have to have a parameter in your algorithm that says, when do you stop collecting information and then start acting greedily. I don't know. There are an infinite number of ways, I think, to practice. Well, a lot of different ways to try to implement that greedy, to get that information in the past that you talked about, I suppose.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So for epsilon greedy, it's just like continuing to explore forever with a probability of epsilon. And this constant epsilon means that you're going to have, for that epsilon probability, you're going to choose like one of the other actions rather than the optimal action. So for every other action, you're going to do it like delta A times. So that is the summation here. And if you sum up all of that, you're going to find like a bound, and that bound is what you're going to get a sum, and then I think that sum again keeps growing every time step. It just keeps growing. Okay, don't have anything else to add here. And again, we also covered that epsilon greedy also has a linear total regret. Okay, now get to optimistic initialization. So I think we had a couple of interesting points that came up earlier also related to optimistic initialization. So the simple idea is just like assign QA to a high value, and then and this is why I think this approach can be combined with with epsilon greedy or decayed epsilon greedy. This does not take away from that in my mind. Because you initialized QA to a high value, the system is going to pick QA, pick all A's till it realizes that like, hey, this action is not really suitable. So this encourages systematic exploration very, very early on, but there is still a chance that you can lock on to like a suboptimal action. So the way that would work is you might actually, the optimal action might give you like some bad values the first few times that you try it out, and then you push it down to a really small value. Then you're not going to go there. Then you're not going to explore again. So if you do if you depend just on optimistic initialization, you can lock onto a suboptimal action. You'll have to probably combine it with like other exploration that you can do. Again, there is a lot of different ways this can be implemented. I don't know, Anthony, if you've tried this as well in addition to epsilon greedy and greedy.
No, not the optimistic initialization. And yeah, I mean, I did my first attempts at the greedy and epsilon greedy gave results which were much worse than the Sutton and Bartow book. And so I tried a few different things and to get something more similar to their results. But I don't know, you kind of have to play around with it, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so what I think the final two lines here are like greedy and optimistic initialization has linear total regret. Epsilon greedy plus optimistic initialization also has linear total regret. Okay. So, okay, decaying epsilon t greedy algorithm. I mean, I think what David Silver says is this is something that you could use. This works in real life. But the tricky thing is to picking a decay schedule and like how to get the decay schedule right. And that's what is like a little harder to do. So one schedule that that is being proposed here is you just keep counting. You just look at like D, which is essentially you are taking like a gap, and you're taking and then once you get that gap, then you use that, and if that gap keeps okay, what did I want to say here? Actually, I am a little bit confused here. Does anyone wants to explain this better than me?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about this, the min formula there. I mean, epsilon t, the probability that you just act randomly at the tth time step, it makes sense to me that in the stationary problem that it's proportional to 1 over t. Right, as you get farther and farther into the problem and more time steps, it makes sense to me that then 1 over t becomes smaller and you act randomly less often because you have more information and you know which arm gives you a high reward and which ones are low, and so you don't have to do as much random action, random exploring. So the 1 over t part in that particular form that he has here makes sense to me. And the c is just the, that's just the parameter. The larger c is the more you explore randomly. You take a random action. That's just a parameter in the algorithm. Yeah, I'm not quite sure on the d, 1 over d, kind of the proportionality to 1 over d squared. It kind of is a little bit the opposite of what I might think, that because the d represents the, to me, d, it's the minimum, when the minimum gap is small, when d is small, that means, doesn't that mean that you have more, that you are closer to the, optimal value? You have your, the expectation of your action is very close to the optimal value, v star, so.
Essentially, you're taking the difference between the first best optimal action versus the second best optimal action.
Well, that's what he said, but I mean, I don't think that's what the formula says. It's the minimum value, isn't it?
Yeah, because the minimum value is that minimum of deltas is that it's essentially the first best action and the second best action, and as that. Yeah.
Well, I don't see where the first and second comes from, and I know, in the lecture, and someone asked a question about that, and there are a lot of ways to construct this, but I mean, the formula is just the minimum.
Minimum of the gaps. Minimum of the gaps. Yeah.
So I don't know why it has to be. I mean, it's just saying that in none of the 10 arms of the 10-armed bandit is the gap.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my interpretation, right? Okay. So I think I get it, but again, correct me if I'm wrong. If the gap is high, so let's say between the first optimal action and the second optimal action, if the gap is very high, then you need fewer time steps of exploration to get there. If the gap is small, you need more, because the gap is small, you don't know whether one is certainly better than two. You have some uncertainty. Maybe two can be better than one. So you need more information to get there. And that's why you need more exploration at that point in time. Does that make sense?
I guess if you're, I don't see that from that formula that it's the first and the second, but if that's what it is, the difference between the first and the second, maybe that makes sense. I have to think about it more.
Is it clear to others, or any other comments on this? Or I can keep moving and we can maybe even discuss it on the Slack channel. Okay, I'll keep moving. So again, one thing here is we want to be able to find a sublinear regret algorithm. So without knowledge of, I don't know what R means that, without having knowledge about the domain and without having knowledge about like what's the optimum value. Because when you say D, you're actually part of that delta formula is your optimal action value, and you don't have that. So that's the challenge here. Okay, so I have a feeling that we just covered this already.
Yep.
Should I just skip a slide? Okay, so I think this is where, like, for me, things got really interesting, right? I think even the previous slide where we were talking about how close is the second action to the first action. For me, I mean, like, it was personally really interesting. I really want to go and understand this Lai and Robbins theorem a little bit better. But the way to think about this is that if, depending on the problem that you have, if you have an optimal arm, which is like so much better on all the other arms, then the amount, and it's not just so much better based on results or information that you're getting, it's very, very clearly much far ahead, then the algorithm can get there faster in some sense. That's what, and your total regret that you're going to incur is also limited by that. So if you look at the theorem here, LT is essentially your at infinity, what is the total regret, and then it is you're looking at the number of time steps you can get there. It's like that's the logarithmic t there, and then the gap delta A divided by the KL divergence of any action with respect to the any arm with respect to the optimal arm. So that's the KL divergence term. So if all the arms are very similar, then essentially that's what this is saying. If all the arms are really similar to each other and it's very hard to pick which is better than the other, you need more time, you need more exploration, you need more information. And if so, that's the similarity in terms of distribution. Then the other part, delta A, is the, think of it as the expected arm value versus of the most optimum arm versus the expected arm value of all the other arms. So if that gap is very high, then you need lesser information. You just know that, like, hey, this arm is just like performing well all the time. So I just need to, this is just my favorite restaurant. There's no doubt about it. If you're able to get there, then you need much lesser amount of exploration to get there. And you're kind of like, you have a bound on your total regret in terms of how long it'll take for you to get there. I was actually a little unhappy. I would say I was actually a little unhappy that, like, we didn't spend more, David Silver didn't spend more time on this or talk about how this can be used in reality also, but I guess it's much harder to do that in reality.
And
was gap in the previous formula in the denominator?
I guess del A is gap.
Right, and the previous one wasn't.
Which one, when you say previous?
Yeah, that one, sorry. If you go to the next slides. Yeah, there del is d and d square goes to the denominator, though, right?
Yes.
So, like, we're using the same logic. I get the thing that if the rewards are like, I mean, if the gap is wider apart, it's kind of saying like one is beating the other one out almost every other time. So you need less exploration, right? That's what the interpretation is, right?
Yes, yes. If the gap is big, you need lesser exploration. That's what this is saying.
Right.
And what this is saying is that the delta A gap, if it is big, then again, you are you have a bound on total regret.
I guess they're essentially talking about two different things. So the first one is talking about picking a schedule.
Correct.
And the second was like, okay, what is the lower bound on the regret that I'm going to accumulate over time? So this is the minimum regret you're going to have at t equal to infinity. So depending upon how hard your problem is, so how hard your problem is basically like, say if I have all the 10, or say if I have 5 arms and all the 5 arms are similar in payout, it's going to be a very hard problem for you to distinguish because you have to continuously explore. But if say like...
so wait 1 second. So if they're very similar, that means your delta is going to be extremely small, right?
Ideally, yes, I guess.
So then how does this formula?
Well, I think the similarity of the arms with similar distributions, I think he referred to that as in the denominator, the KL then would be very
Yeah,
small.
that's the distribution would be the same, right? But the payout, I mean, in terms of the gap, a gap we are kind of referencing with the rewards, right?
Yes.
The cumulative.
The V star minus.
Correct. Yeah, sorry, V star minus that. Yeah, sorry. So in that case, if they're very identically giving you back the same rewards, then that V star minus that will be pretty small, right?
Yes.
More or less, yes.
And that's okay, right? Because then it does not matter from a minimizing total regret perspective that you're choosing one of them.
Because they're almost the same.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Actually, does the KL divergence, does that take into account the mean? If you have two Gaussian or normal distributions with a different mean?
It takes into account the entire shape of each distribution.
So
I guess these will play much better once we go into the Thompson sampling or the UCBs. You'll appreciate this term more, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So taking the cue there, I'll just move on to the next slide. For me, it was very interesting. Okay. So this is where I think things start becoming real, right? Where again, UCB, it's also used in industry. It's really well proven. People use it a lot. So we have three shapes of three different actions here: QA1, QA2, QA3. Now, the way to think about these three different shapes, A1, A2, A3, is we have tested out A3 a lot more. We have a lot more information about A3. Or A3 is much more well-defined in our minds. So, whereas A2 and A3, there is still some more to learn. And at this point of time, if you choose a greedy, you're going to choose A1 all points in time. You're not going to choose A2 or A3. Okay, so but the idea is A1 still is like undefined, and there is like a long tail. If you look at both A2 and A3, there is enough area under the curve on A2 and A3 on the right hand side of A1. And that is essentially what we would end up start exploiting, where we're going to say, hey, if there is an upper confidence, there is more confidence that like, hey, maybe the mean that we are thinking about A1 is like much more to the right, but we just don't have enough information of getting it. Maybe it is better than A3. Maybe A2 is better than A3. Maybe A1 is better than A3, but we need more information to more samples and more information for us to be able to narrow the A1 and A2 distribution curves based on information that we have, so that we can very clearly say, hey, it's better than A3 or it's not better than A3. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so this is one slide that was not there in the lecture, but the idea is what happens when you pick the blue action. We are less uncertain about the value. I don't know if the slide changes from the, sorry. Yeah, so now let's see, this is the first slide. And then in the second slide, what it means is we picked A1 again, and then now the A1 curve shifts a little bit more to the left. And because it shifts a little bit more to the left, the mean, we are less uncertain about the A1 value. And we are more likely to pick another action, because look at this here. Now there is like beyond what I talked about earlier was there is like a lot more area under the curve on A1 beyond A3, beyond 3.2. Whereas once you picked A1, the new information that you got is there's nothing, literally there is nothing under the area beyond 3.2 or beyond A3. So now, by getting that additional information, you took an there was uncertainty, and you took an optimistic action, but now you know that the confidence that A1 is ever going to be better than A3 has gone down dramatically. So we will probably not pick A1 at all in the future. So that's the intuition there. Now, how does this come into play? So the idea is, what we will do is, we are just going to say that right now you have an estimate of Q. You have an estimate of what you're going to get when you pick an action. You're going to add a bonus term, which is the upper confidence bound, where you're going to say, you are not going to choose an action based on just Q, your current known estimate of Q, but you're going to choose an action based on the current known estimate of Q plus a bonus term. And the bonus term is, one way to think of the bonus term is like from this picture here, like where this is the way I internalized it. Maybe there is an actual way that someone else can talk about. It's like, hey, I have QA here, QA3 here. There is still a lot of area under the curve beyond QA3 for QA1. So that is the upper confidence U term that I'll add over here. Okay. Now there are different ways of getting this upper confidence, which is what there are a couple of approaches we will talk about later. But the intuition is, if you have chosen a particular action a smaller number of times, you have a larger bonus term because the estimated value is uncertain. Well, if you have picked a larger number of times, then you have a smaller bonus term in terms of what additional upper confidence, what more confidence do you have to get a better value than your current estimate. Any questions here? I know I'm also running a little late on time. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, so this is like really fun for me. So Hoeffding's inequality, I've come across it in multiple different situations earlier, but when I looked at this and how David Silver brings it, or like whoever figured this out, how to use Hoeffding's inequality to make this all real and make this applicable, is just like was really fun for me. So so basically, forget this is how he talks about it. Like, forget reinforcement learning. Let's just say that you keep pulling these arms, and then you got like 10 samples of a particular arm's action, 10 sample of reward values for taking that particular arm. Now, at that point of time, you can just take an average of those 10 samples, and that's your sample mean. Now, what's the probability that the actual or the expected value of that arm is greater than mean plus a U term? And so this is U is the upper confidence bound we talked about in the previous slide. The probability is bounded by this e power minus t 2 tu square. Now, what we can do here is that let's just say that you want a 95. So this is like us establishing a lever, right? You can just tell your system, I want a 95% chance that you picked the optimal value. So then once you say that I want a 95% chance, then you set that to P, and you use this formula to find out like what your UT of A should be. So the P is given by us to the system, and then the number of times you pulled a particular arm is just simple counting. Based on that, you get a very easy way of figuring out what your UT bonus for every single action is. And think about it. This is like if you've not pulled any arm, this value is essentially like an infinite bonus because NT is 0. So you are forced to pick every single arm. So you're exploring systematically. Now, once you've pulled something once, still this bonus term is very high. As you keep pulling that arm more times, the bonus term keeps going down. And once the bonus term keeps going down, you have enough information for your, keep doing this. Sorry. It's like whether I use my up arrow, down arrow, or my mouse. Yeah, so this is the slide I wanted to get to. So as you collect more information, your U term keeps going down now, but you have more. What does it mean? You have more confidence in your Q term to make that decision. So you no longer need the U term to play a role in picking that particular action. You have enough information whether you should pick or not pick that particular action. Any question here? Yeah, so now the other important part.
Also, I guess the one thing that you forgot to mention is that the reward is bounded. So we normalize the rewards between 0 to 1.
Yes, that's an important point here. I think someone else also asked the question in the lecture where like you are assuming a certain max reward, whereas you could potentially be in situations where you're getting a much bigger reward. Then how do you handle that situation? So someone did ask that question. So you do have to apply this. You do have to normalize your rewards in a range of 0 to 1. Otherwise, you cannot apply this. I mean, finally, this is a theorem. This theorem is giving a way of bringing in a heuristic in place. So you're trying to use some one of these theorems for bounds to come up with like nice heuristics that you can play around with. In fact, there was one slide. Sorry, I think that's not here, but in the lecture he talks about other inequalities that you can also bring in to figure out a different way of calculating U values. But I don't think it is in the slide deck. Okay, cool. Okay, so this then brings us to an algorithm, which is the UCB1 algorithm. In fact, in AlphaGo, they applied a slight modification of the UCB1 algorithm for their exploration. So maybe I'll post a screenshot or something of that on the Slack channel. Just remember to do that. Again, this is what we started out, right? We said like, hey, we want sublinear regret. We do not want linear regret. So the UCB algorithm achieves logarithmic total regret, asymptotic total regret. And that's great. This is what we wanted to do. We wanted to really explore appropriately, but while at the same time, keep exploiting along the way. So this achieves that. So it gives us a good balance compared to greedy or epsilon greedy. Okay, so then this is like examples, right, of what works and what does not work on the 10-armed bandit. And one interesting point that they make is like surprise in how well epsilon greedy performs compared to UCB, because all of this stuff that we covered earlier was just like theory, right? Oh, man, again, I did that. All of the stuff that we go through in terms of applying Hoeffding's inequality to get the upper confidence bound is all theory, but then how does it work on the 10-armed bandit? In the 10-armed bandit, epsilon greedy performs much better than expected. But the basic idea is that you take a lot of variety of different problems, UCB does perform well in real life. So 10-armed bandit is finally, it's a contrived test bed for benchmarking algorithms. So UCB is it's certainly one of the algorithms, exploration algorithms that gets used in real life. Okay, so that's all of multi-armed bandits that got covered. Let me just try to share a summary. Oh, I need to change my, 1 second. Pause share, stop share, and I'm going to share the summary. I think this is it. Able to see my, see David Silver there?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot I took. So this is a summary of all the various different approaches that we just talked about. The one thing that we did not cover, information state space, unfortunately is not in the slide deck early on, but he covers it in the lecture. So because I've been following the slide deck, I did not get there. Maybe I'll just make a couple of points here, and if someone else has something to add, they can also add here. So random exploration is like epsilon greedy, softmax. You can try out a lot of different things. It's covered in the Sutton and Bartow book. You are essentially just saying, I'm going to prop up on a random basis. I'm just going to keep getting more information. But optimism in the face of uncertainty, you are not randomly collecting information. You are collecting information where you have more uncertainty. And there are a few different approaches. We covered optimistic initialization. We covered UCB. Again, I guess the maybe the slide deck covers Thompson sampling. I can go and check back, or if someone else knows, they can tell me. Information state space. So this is again like pretty interesting, where you are actually looking at thinking of this problem of exploration as a sequential decision-making problem. So every step, you are not just saying, am I going to exploit, am I going to explore? But you're also looking at what happened what information do I have from the previous states where I explored, and how much information do I have? So how many times have I gone to this particular state also becomes an input into the how do I want to explore decision making at that point of time. And then Git-in synthesis is more, think of it as like a dynamic programming approach of solving. You just like it's a solved analytical approach that you can use, where you can just look at a table, and then based on the table, instead of doing like UCB where you are doing some calculation to determine whether you are going to explore more or collect more for a particular action, Git-in synthesis actually tells you that like, hey, you have not done enough counts here, go and do this. You have not done enough exploration for this particular action, go and explore here. You can just do a table lookup. You don't need to do any calculation. It's a table lookup that you can do to go and figure it out. I'm actually going to go back to the slide deck here because there is a chance that some of this actually gets covered. Sorry for the switching back and forth. Okay, are you able to see the slide deck again?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So, okay, it's just going to Bayesian bandits. So I'm going to get into this a little bit. Anything on multi-armed bandits anyone else wants to bring up here? We are at 1:15. Okay, so Bayesian bandits. So the basic idea here is, I know something about the problem. I want to bring my prior knowledge of the problem in terms of which actions work well, which actions don't work well, into the solution approach. So that is the basic intuition here. I mean, like Bayesian versus frequentist, that's the basic approach. In Bayesian, you're saying, hey, I have some priors. I know that from what I've heard or what I've seen, this way of doing things gives you more rewards than that way of doing things. I can't, and like I have a sense of it, but why don't you use this as a starting point? And then, so that's the prior knowledge. And then you use that prior knowledge, and you you are also collecting samples. You're also collecting information along the way. So again, going back to the restaurant selection problem, right? Like I'm Indian, so my basic prior is probably one of my favorite restaurants is going to be an Indian restaurant. So let me try out Indian restaurants first, and then I know certain dishes in those Indian restaurants are something that I've historically liked. And I also know that if I go to like a North Indian style restaurant, the South Indian dishes that North Indian restaurant gives me is not going to be great. If I go to, or if I go to a Mexican restaurant in California, it's probably going to be better than a Mexican restaurant in New York. So these are all my priors, right? When it comes to restaurant selection. So I'll probably bring those priors in, and then I'll use those priors to make my exploration decisions. I might still go to a Mexican restaurant in New York because I just want to check it out. I just want to collect information. But the number of times that I'll go to that Mexican restaurant in New York is much, much lower than the number of chances that I'll go that I'll give to a Mexican restaurant in California. So this is the way I think about this personally. I approach this. Anything else someone else has to add here?
Do you have that slide on the beta distribution part where they update the posterior? Like, because that was actually like very informative for me.
Feeling it's, oh yeah, this one, right?
Yep, this one. Yeah. So I
It was
actually
informative. I think you should cover it.
no, like because like here it was a easy way of updating the posteriors. So that's why. So if you look at it, like you start with a say a normal prior, say beta 00, but like if you like it, if you don't like it, you make the update as alpha a plus 1, and if you like it, you do a beta a plus 1, so you update the distribution in that way. So they have given like how the posteriors will be updated. So I actually felt this was like, because like generally if you run any Bayesian, you need to run like at least in real life, you will run an inference algorithm, and like you don't necessarily have an intuition as to like how your posterior would look like. And this was like a very, very easy way for me to visualize how the posteriors would look like. So that's why I like this one out.
Yeah, I think the good thing about this particular slide is it covers two things for us. One, it helps us think about Bayesian. Second, it is also talking about the information state search approach, where the Bayesian part here is essentially the prior here, right? Where you're assuming that drug 1 has a particular prior and drug 2 has a different prior. The information state approach part here, state search approach part here is that you are thinking further in the future. You're just saying, I'm going to try out drug 1 first, and I'm going to try out drug 2 first. You build this tree up where if drug 1 in my first, when I give drug 1 to patient 1, if it was a success or a failure, I will update my distributions, my prior, I get a posterior, and then I update my distributions where the new distribution would look like this, for in case of success, in cases of failure. And then again for patient 2, I'll take an action which is maybe drug 1, maybe drug 2. If I do drug 1 again, if I get 2 consecutive successes, then my distribution is going to look like this. So you kind of draw out your tree. Once you've drawn out your tree, then because you have drawn out your tree in a certain way, based on the structure of the tree, which depends on your priors, basically, you can make really good exploration decisions along the way. You've planned out, you're mapped out your path. This is what I think Git and Syndis and things like that gives us for us. You can say, hey, step one, I'm going to do this. If I get a success, my distributions change in this way. So I'm going to step two, I'm going to do this. So you just plan out that entire tree, and then you can then like cull off your trees along the way. So then you're making exploration decisions you have planned out. It's a sequential decision you're making along the way. You're not just like at a point in time making the decision. So that way, this if you spend time on the slide, and I think you can get that also. Cool. So given that we don't have much time, maybe just get into just like that initial contextual bandit explanation, where the basic thing here is that you are also bringing in a state, and you still take an action, you get a reward, but every time before you take an action, you also know some state, and based on that state, you can make a decision whether you want to take this in that state. If you take an action, you get this reward. So that's what contextual reward here is. I think there's like, for me, contextual bandits and MDP, there is always some sort of confusion, and like I'm like, even if I understand it today, next week, after the time that I've spent in this material, next week, if you ask me, a good chance that I'm still confused at that point of time. Is there some intuition someone has how to just like permanently in my mind differentiate between contextual bandits and the full pure RL problem? If someone can give that intuition, that will be great.
I guess like if you look at the restaurant case itself, right? From a generalized perspective, if you are putting in, whenever you talked about the restaurant case, you just assumed your case, right? Like, so say, hey, I like this, and hey, I like this. So but if you put in each user as a particular, so if you take the user out, then that's your kind of like an armed bandit. But if you put in a user there, that becomes like a contextualized bandit, because like you're bringing in user preferences in solving a reward problem. So I guess the state here, even in the example that David Silva mentions, right? So the state here refers to the user who is visiting that site, so that like you basically recommend or show an ad that the user is most likely to click it. And so, yeah, that's what I feel like is a major difference.
Yeah, I guess that's the difference between contextual bandits and bandits. I think how you contrast it with MDP in my mind is just the sequential decision making part of it.
Oh, the MDPs, okay.
Yeah.
But like, isn't just like the bandit problem is just like a one state, one action MDP, right? In the sense like, yeah, so say that you have a sequence of steps to do to select something, would that be a MDP type situation?
Yeah, I think one is sequence, and second, the action that you're taking impacting the state. I think in contextual bandits, you're assuming that, hey, my state is whatever it is. I don't know whether my action is impacting my state, or you're actually making a stronger assumption that like my action does not impact the state. Again, discussion we can have in its own right. Okay, so then just talks about some of the approaches that we already discussed, which can then be applied. Whatever we applied for multi-armed bandits, you can apply for contextual bandits. Just bring in an S in all the formulas. And then don't have time to get into this. He also didn't go through this. I think this is the example where he talks about Yahoo using this for using linear UCB for selecting their front page news. And I think there are like videos about this out there online as well. And where they looked at, this is a contextual bandit use case where the context is essentially who's the user and maybe their cookies and things like that Yahoo uses to determine the front page news, what to show. And then they're comparing different algorithms, linear versus logistic versus probabilistic. Then quickly, the same principles of exploration, exploitation, you can also apply to MDPs. And this is where we, I think we quickly talked about it when we started out, where I said, instead of using epsilon greedy in all or control step, you can use other pieces. Epsilon greedy is your naive exploration. You can bring in like other approaches that we just talked about earlier in the context of multi-armed bandits to MDPs. And then again, you can have again, optimistic initialization for model free versus model based. In model based, you're essentially making an assumption that for some transition for which you do not have information, you just assume that you're getting the maximum reward, which is essentially what he is saying as go to heaven. And that way you are collecting information to improve your model. And then once you collect information about improving the model and your model becomes better, then you can plan better and then you have better results overall. And the example of it is an RMAX. I've heard about RMAX earlier also in some other context. So in my mind, I think this is a very, very popular algorithm. Okay, this is all very similar in terms of what we covered in multi-armed bandits. Unfortunately, we did not get time to talk about Thompson sampling. By the way, Thompson sampling is also very popular in industry. In fact, one of my data scientists has been after me to help fund it, and we have not had a chance to do it. Yeah, I think if you have time, it'll be good for you to look at Thompson sampling. It's a simple, you pull a sample from you just like assume once you assume a certain distribution, you just pull a sample based on that distribution. Maybe it's a Gaussian, you pull a sample and then you pull a sample from multiple distributions for each action, and then you compare, you assume that the sample that you get is your mean rather than your estimate of the mean. And then you use that to choose a greedy action. Going over this really quickly. And the information state purge in MDP is interesting, right? The way I thought about it was you have an MDP that you're solving, but in that MDP, you have to balance exploration and exploitation. And exploration, you frame it as a different MDP. This is the way I think about it. If I've got it wrong, please correct me here. So it's like turtles all the way down. Okay. Either I'm right or you do not have a way to articulate it properly to me or help me learn better.
I actually missed that one. Can you just repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah. So information state search and MDPs, you take your problem, you formulate it as an MDP. Now, when you go into exploration so when you're solving your problem using to collect more information and exploration, the exploration part, you set it up as a different MDP. So you essentially have two different MDPs. One MDP for your problem formulation, second MDP for exploration within your problem formulation. Is that right or wrong?
I thought like we just have an augmented thing where we basically combine the history of your earlier exploratory phase into the current decision making at that time step.
Yeah, but if we
So
go
basically
back,
you'll have an augmented kind of like a state space rather than, I don't think it's two different thing rather than combining two things into one single state space.
okay. So for me, this is the way I look at it, right? This is a tree. Now, this tree is just for exploration. This does not talk about you probably would have a different tree just for the problem itself. Okay, I think I'll probably spend more time on
Yeah.
it. So we are at 1:30 and can't get into like a deep discussion like that right now. Yeah, so just to quickly go to conclusion. So we covered a bunch of different principles for exploration, exploitation. There's still a lot of research happening in this space. Um, because I think if you are able to explore very efficiently, that means, I mean, one is efficiently, second is safe, right? I think we talked about how to do safe
Yeah.
exploration for windmills earlier. So because of that, this is still a very, there is a lot of research going on here, but there are a lot of different techniques which has worked in, especially in multi-armed bandit situations that got covered here. And also uh, uh, things to do or things to learn for us is probably how do you expand it out to MTPs, which is what we've been focusing on for most of this lecture series. And we talked about contextual bandits very quickly, where it's like an extension to multi-armed bandits. And even for contextual bandits, you're able to apply some of these approaches or techniques. And they also apply to MTP, but you have to be careful in how you apply it to MTP. So that brings us to the end of this lecture series, except for lecture 10, which talks about how they applied it to, I guess, Atari games.
Yeah. So, okay. Do we want to do the discussion, or is it too late and we just, or you just want to keep it in Slack session, Slack as a